Hello, we are the Association for Child and Adolescent Mental Health, or ACAM for short.
A very, very warm welcome to Lizzie, Dr. Lizzie Winstone, who is from a senior research associate actually from the University of Bristol Centre for Academic Mental Health. And Lizzie's research focuses on how young people engage with their peers, family and the wider public through social media, and whether this is related to their mental health. She explores whether social media use means different things to different people and the ways in which different social media activities may represent sources of digital stress, which is obviously very relevant to us this evening. Lizzie is also interested in online support for people who self-harm and in understanding short-term fluctuations in self-harm thoughts and behaviours. And she has a keen interest in research methods. She previously worked for several years as a survey methodologist for the European Social Survey. So you're very welcome, Lizzie. It's great to have you here this evening for our final session. Over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Jan. Thanks very much. Hi, everybody. So I've tried, as Jan mentioned, to create a kind of balanced picture within these slides because I think that one of the key messages from current research is that we should try not to be too alarmist about social media use. There are no longer kind of clear boundaries between online and offline lives, and particularly for young people. Different aspects of social media use have different risks and benefits for different individuals. And I think as parents and teachers, we need to be focusing on supporting young people to use social media in a way that protects and benefits their mental health rather than kind of panicking. So, is social media use bad for young people's mental health? Many studies have tried to answer this question, and most of these studies have taken a large group of young people, asked them to estimate how much they use social media in terms of kind of hours on a typical day, and then also ask them about to rate their own mental health. And so do these studies show that teenagers who use more social media have worse mental health? In general, yes. Taken all together, the evidence suggests a very small association between more time on social media and worse mental health across young people on average. So there are those in the academic world who kind of take these findings to describe social media as having, and I'm quoting here, destroyed a generation. So, you know, the root of all evil. And the argument from this perspective is that even if that association is very small, you know, when the scale is so large, when the implications are for pretty much all young people, then that becomes a serious effect. And then there are others who completely reject these perspectives as a form of moral panic, highlighting, you know, the smallness of this association and pointing out that we can see stronger effects on young people's mental health of things like eating breakfast, but we don't tend to kind of panic about those things. So I think this kind of polarization of interpretations can create confusion, and I'm not convinced that we're even really asking the right question here. So I'm going to read out a quote from a really nice blog that's written by a psychologist in the States called Jacqueline Nesi, because I think she puts it really nicely. So what these studies do is essentially take an average of all the time that kids spend on social media and then look at how it affects all kids altogether. So in doing so, these studies are glossing over two very important truths. Number one, kids are very different from one another. And number two, a lot of different things are happening on social media. So there's a lot of good stuff happening on social media for teens, like connecting with friends, learning about the world and generally having fun. There's also a lot of bad stuff happening, like exposure to harmful or inappropriate content, negative comparisons with others, and the feeling that they can't stop using it even if they want to. So there are benefits of social media and there are risks. and measures of this kind of overall time spent lump all these experiences together, so it's no wonder the effect seems small. Add to that the fact that teens use and are affected by social media in very different ways, based simply on who they are and their individual strengths and vulnerabilities. So for some teens, social media does have a mostly negative impact on their mental health. For others, it's mostly positive. And for most young people, it's a mix of positive and negative. Social media is so integral to the everyday lives of young people, if not all of us, that to demonize it, I think, risks alienating teenagers and can make them feel devalued or misunderstood by older generations. And my own research has highlighted the importance of adults taking this kind of balanced approach to social media use, which then enables young people to feel able to talk to those adults if they encounter challenging situations online without this kind of fear that their phones might be confiscated if they disclose something. So discussions and guidance around social media use for teenagers really needs to move beyond these arguments over screen time and focus on nuance and on equipping young people with the social, emotional and digital tools to empower them to get the best out of their social media experiences while minimizing the risks. So we have a poll for you. Which is asking, I'm not sure, sorry, which is asking, how is social media use currently addressed at your own school? Is it within ICT lessons or e-safety lessons, within the PSHE or RSE curriculums, or some kind of combination of the above, or do you think it's not addressed at all? So I'll just pause for a few moments while everybody responds. So it's looking like, oops, perhaps unsurprisingly, a combination of the above, but possibly more so within e-safety, and some saying none of the above, and fewer within PSHE lessons. Okay, oops. Sorry, I'm experimenting with sharing a portion of my screen, which I think may be messing up the poll slightly. Okay. So, Matt, I don't know if you're able to close the poll. I'm not sure. Okay.
Sure. Big pardon.
Thank you. Okay, now, as Jan mentioned, I'm going to give you a very brief overview of what I think is this very useful framework that's produced by the UK Council for Internet Safety. This was produced in 2020, so it's already slightly out of date. I'm not affiliated in any way with the organisation, but I just think it's quite a useful resource, which seems to align well with many key research findings and does a good job of kind of translating them into priorities for how social media might be considered within PSHE, RSE or e-safety lessons. And I think they've produced some really nice free teaching resources and lesson plans. So if you're interested in investigating those further, if you're not already aware, you can Google Project Evolve for more information. So the framework covers 8 topics. The first is self-image and identity. Second is online relationships. Then online reputation, online bullying, managing online information, health, well-being and lifestyle, privacy and security, and copyright and ownership. So I'm just going to give you a really brief overview of some of the evidence and some recommendations within each theme. So self-image and identity, this theme is about recognising that people may present themselves differently online, including the use of digital manipulation such as filters and the psychological and ethical implications of that. Understanding that online representations can perpetuate stereotypes relating to gender and race, for example, and also understanding the social pressures that can relate to social comparisons, a need for validation, and a fear of missing out. So evidence suggests that social media can be an important platform for identity experimentation and creativity, but that younger users in particular may lack skills in audience management, so thinking about what to share, how to share it, and with whom. And they need to be aware of permanence, of screenshotting, as well as laws and implications of sharing sexual content online. Stringent use of privacy settings can be an easy step to take when broadcasting or sharing content online. For example, sharing selfies or other content within close friendship groups rather than more widely. In terms of passive social media use or browsing of content, evidence-based recommendations include supporting an increased understanding of the role of algorithms in shaping social norms, in promoting specific content, and then again, increasing awareness of others' kind of self-presentation strategies online, and being mindful of how appropriate particular content might be as a source for social comparison. And there are some interesting new studies emerging on periods of vulnerability to social media risks that might vary by age or developmental stage. So for girls, this period of vulnerability seems to be around 12 to 13 years, and then again at 19 years. And for boys a bit later, around 14 to 15 years, and also at 19 years. So this could relate to periods where a sense of self or self-worth are particularly fragile, or it could also be about those kind of key transitions to independence and difficulties with kind of self-regulating time spent online. Online relationships, this theme focuses on the ways that social media can be used to benefit or shape, in other ways, communication with others. So within this strand, this includes online specific things like understanding the motivations of social influencers, for example, trolling, laws around sexting, but it also covers issues that can cut across the online and offline context of relationships, such as trust, consent, discrimination, or coercion. So my research suggests that social media can enhance friendships through kind of sharing experiences, so things like watching content together. It can remove boundaries so that you can now stay in touch with a school friend who's moved to the other side of the world. And enhance kind of closeness of friendships through co-producing content, so capturing a fun moment together on video, for example. However, negative experiences, things like screenshotting or misappropriation of content, so somebody altering a digital image, for example, can really undermine trust among peers. And again, sharing content within kind of carefully defined groups can be a useful recommendation. But I think that broader focus on trust and consent within relationships in general is really essential. Research also suggests that navigating issues of online availability can be a particular challenge, with these feelings of kind of being over-connected common among young people. So that includes things like pressure to respond immediately to a message, or finding it very difficult to leave an online conversation. And I think discussions with young people around these feelings of overconnectedness can be accompanied by very practical steps, such as removing these kind of message read settings, and also discouraging nighttime phone use. There's also evidence that online sexual harassment and receipt of unsolicited contact by strangers, for example, are common even among very young social media users. And again, effective management of privacy settings is really key in avoiding this, as well as that feeling of being able to approach a trusted adult for support when faced with uncomfortable or disturbing situations. Okay, so overlapping with self-image, this theme of online reputation is about how our online profiles might be perceived or received by others. So what content is or is not appropriate and indeed legal to share and with whom, and understanding that the content we like, forward and share is then associated with our digital profile, and that can have implications for future opportunities such as university or job applications. And that broadcasting behaviour, so sharing content widely, can be a significant source of what we call digital stress among young people. And research suggests that this type of social media use in particular can be associated with a fear of being judged or negatively evaluated, with risks to privacy. And the content that's shared is then shaped by kind of cultural expectations of being perfect or of being sexualized. And again, those privacy settings and audience management skills are really key here. Okay, online bullying. So cyberbullying is considered to be one of the most important kind of mediators or mechanisms in the relationship between social media use and poor mental health. So discussions around online bullying will cover most of the same themes as offline bullying. And I think the main thing to highlight in terms of evidence here really is the clear relationship between bullying, both in terms of victimization and perpetration, and those later poor mental health outcomes, including things like self-harm. And that applies to both online and offline contexts. So issues that are particularly relevant to the online context might include being able to recognise warning signs that someone might be bullied online, different media through which someone might be bullied, so through images, chat, creation of fake profiles, being excluded from group chats, understanding the role of anonymity or disinhibition online, and then steps available on different platforms to block someone who's being abusive. Also how issues can escalate online, as well as laws relating to online bullying. So managing online information, this strand is about developing strategies for critically evaluating information online and skills in searching for information. So I don't have much to offer here in terms of research findings on this, but priorities within this strand of kind of media literacy might include understanding bots, fake news, disinformation, echo chambers, how to flag inappropriate content, and so on. So health, wellbeing and lifestyle is obviously quite an important strand here. And while there isn't clear evidence of that kind of linear relationship between social media screen time and mental health, there are several studies that point to what's called a Goldilocks effect, whereby kind of moderate screen time and moderate use of social media for kind of communicating with your friends is unproblematic and even beneficial to your well-being. But then that excessive screen time or excessive sharing of content, perhaps to public audiences, is then linked to poorer well-being. And also within this theme, so one of the stronger areas of evidence is around sleep as a key mediator or mechanism between social media use and well-being. So using social media in bed, particularly if it's something that might be quite emotionally charged, can be really disruptive to sleep. And strategies that can help include things like not using social media just before bed, using a do not disturb setting, leaving a phone outside the bedroom at night, buying an alarm clock, and so on. So this strand of the framework is about that kind of self-regulation of screen time, but it's also about evaluating the pros and cons of fitness, wellness and meditation apps, the reliability of health information online, and the opportunities and risks that are attached to help seeking online, for example, for eating disorders or self-harm. So evidence suggests that online information provided by mental health organisations, including those kind of lived experience stories, can be a really valuable form of help for young people who might be unable to access in-person support for one reason or another. However, it's also common to stumble across graphic or harmful material while searching for help on social media. And those kind of online support forums can often become toxic and competitive spaces. So discussions in this space, I think, need to involve safe searching, identifying reliable support, how to report harmful content, and knowing who to talk to if a young person feels at risk or suspects somebody else might be. So privacy and security, this feeds into several other strands that I've already mentioned, but also includes considerations of things like geotagging, having a strong password, scams, webcams, and browser settings. So the only thing I wanted to add here is that privacy concerns are commonly reported by young people when thinking about how their own social media use relates to their mental health. And have reported to contribute to this kind of general sense of social media feeling like a dangerous space, and young people themselves feeling quite vulnerable online. So I think this kind of underlines the fact that it's important that those conversations around social media use don't only focus on risk, but also on opportunities and how to improve digital literacy skills that can foster feelings of resilience while you're online. And then finally, the framework includes resources around copyright and ownership. I'm not going to say too much about this strand, as I think the bits that are relevant to mental health are covered elsewhere, so things like consent and screenshotting. Okay, we have another poll. Apologies if I've covered, this framework that you're already very familiar with, but this poll is about which of those 8 themes you feel is most relevant, in your opinion, to young people's mental health, just out of interest, really. So we have lots of people, it looks like, saying self-image and identity, some online bullying, health, wellbeing and lifestyle. I think I would probably agree with all those. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so sorry, Matt, I don't know if you're able to stop the poll. Whenever I try and stop it, it just jumps back onto the middle of the screen. But yeah, it looks like self-image and identity is the most popular answer there. Okay, thank you for that. So the final part of my slides really focuses on vulnerable groups. So when I'm talking about vulnerable groups in this presentation, I'm talking about young people with existing poor mental health. And the following points that I'm going to go through come from a very recent systematic review of the evidence looking at the role of digital experiences for young people with pre-existing mental health conditions. And I think you've got the link to that systematic review in the chat. So first of all, seeking social connection online is a common motivation for most people to use social media, but for those struggling with mental health difficulties, online forums and peer feedback can be a really important source of support. For those young people who self-harm, however, there can be a risk of self-harm feeling normalised, a risk of learning new methods for self-harm or suicide, or of inadvertent exposure to material that might feel triggering. So some young people have reported their have also reported their online help-seeking behaviour, so where they kind of share their emotional struggles more publicly on social media, perhaps, and that has been perceived by peers as kind of attention-seeking behaviour, and then carries this risk of then being bullied or ostracised by the peer group. Second, passive social media use, so that might include things like listening to music or watching videos online, is commonly reported as a form of coping with distress or with self-harm urges by means of temporary distraction or escape. However, the evidence on whether or not this is an effective coping mechanism is still lacking. Third, and in common with most young people, social media can be used to elicit kind of social validation in the form of likes, views, or shares. And this can lead to kind of risky sharing practices, so sharing sexually suggestive or graphic self-harm content. And then on the other hand, that kind of pressure to appear happy or to put up a front online can feel really exhausting for young users with depression, for example. And young people with mental health difficulties might also be more likely to internalise a lack of online feedback, which would then exacerbate those kind of negative emotions or poor self-esteem. Fourth, as I've already mentioned, those seeking help online can frequently report stumbling across harmful material relating to self-harm, to eating disorders or depression, and that can be really distressing. And any engagement with that kind of content, so even just kind of pausing to watch a portion of a video clip, can then really spiral kind of algorithmically into further exposure, which is what we saw in the case of Molly Russell. Fifth, as we've already mentioned, cyberbullying is associated with multiple negative psychological outcomes, and rates of cyberbullying are higher in those with poor mental health. However, the evidence is often cross-sectional, so not able to establish causality or the direction of the effect, and we don't currently know whether young people with poor mental health are more or less impacted by cyberbullying. Finally, evidence suggests that many young people, but especially those with mental health difficulties, struggle to self-regulate their social media use, and sometimes describe themselves as feeling addicted. And that can be controversial and quite difficult to test, because people with anxiety or depression may simply be more inclined to kind of ruminate on their social media use or overestimate their own screen time. So just to kind of illustrate some of these points with some quotes from my own interviews with 13-year-olds, I'll leave you to read the quotes yourselves, but I think they kind of illustrate the role that algorithms can play in exacerbating existing poor mental health. So one participant in my study who kind of alluded to overcoming her own mental health difficulties. So while she found social media to be a useful outlet to distract from anxiety, she described the additional measures that were required to ensure her own social media use didn't trigger problems. So that included the need to regularly update settings and preferences to avoid being exposed to negative or to anxiety-provoking content. So a user needs to mark content as inappropriate in order to influence the platform's algorithms. Other strategies included unfollowing or blocking certain accounts, but were reported to not always be effective. So this participant described being able to block content that was labelled with specific hashtags that might feel personally triggering, but that blocked content would still appear just with a warning that could easily be bypassed. And the same participant mentioned how certain social media trends, such as threatening kind of chain mail posts, had worsened her existing anxiety as a younger child, and had required her to learn how to effectively navigate social media in order to limit its negative effects. So despite learning techniques for this and paying heed to disclaimers, there was still this sense of vulnerability to harmful, triggering or disturbing content. For example, if somebody had failed to tag it appropriately when they'd shared it. So the point of this is really to highlight that additional burden that's placed on young people who are in distress or who are recovering from mental health difficulties in terms of those kind of additional steps and additional skills that are required in order to protect themselves online. So there are clearly some additional kind of considerations that are needed when supporting this group with their social media use. So just before I finish my presentation, another poll, just out of interest, is asking you how well you feel your school addresses issues around social media use. So moderately pessimistic responses coming in. Minority saying very well, about half of you saying quite well, almost half saying not very well, and luckily a small minority saying not at all well. Okay. Okay, so just to summarize then, not sure how to get rid of this whole box. Hopefully that's done. So just to summarize then, we now have a, oops, sorry, my slides have gone a bit funny. One moment. Okay, just to summarize, we now have a growing and more robust evidence base that different online experiences and different individual vulnerabilities are more important for young people's mental health than screen time when it comes to social media use. So many issues relating to social media risks and opportunities overlap with offline issues around identity development and relationships, and can be integrated within PSHE or RSE lessons. And there are some good existing resources available for this. Additionally, supporting the development of digital skills, including that literacy around social media algorithms, I think is essential. So a focus on resilience and on opportunity might be better than overemphasizing harms when it comes to social media use, in order to kind of foster those feelings of being able to approach adults when they encounter difficult situations online. And finally, young people with poor mental health are likely to face quite specific challenges when navigating social media and are likely to need additional support. Okay, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening. And I think I'm handing back over to Jan.
Thank you, Lizzie. Yeah, that's right. And thank you so much for such an informative and valuable presentation. And actually, the document that you took us through, I don't know how many teachers are aware of that document. It's been in circulation for about 4 years now. It was marginally updated in 2020. Obviously, a huge change has happened since then because of the explosion, I think, of social media for all sorts of reasons, not least of which has been COVID. And we've seen as you pointed out, there has been positive and negative with the use of social media. And for many young people during COVID, social media was a lifeline and it kept them connected to friends, but also like anything that's overused. And in fact, I think one of the things that really struck me throughout your presentation, which was so valuable, was what you said about the Goldilocks effect. It's that they're just getting that sweet spot just right, and balance. When we talk about anything in relation to health education, everything is about balance, isn't it? You know, having the right amount of sleep, doing the right amount of exercise. It's possible to do too much. And then when we talk about foods. You know, you could eat too many of a certain healthy food, so-called healthy food, so it all comes back to balance. But for me, what's key is the self-regulation element as well. And what we know is that the teenage brain, and there's got a lot of research now emerging, that the teenage brain is kind of goes through a bit of a rewiring process, which makes it harder for young people to self-regulate during those years. And so this is at a time when social media is becoming such a part of their life. So that's a great challenge for us in schools, for both primary schools as they're seeing children entering into puberty and adolescence, and then for secondary schools as children are going through. So there are challenges, but you've really helped us to see the benefits as well as the negatives. So we're looking forward to the Q&A. What we're going to do just before we move on to the Q&A is we're going to pause for a moment and just ask people to complete the survey. Matt is going to put the link to the survey in the chat for us, and we're just going to pause for a moment so that you can take time to just complete that. There will be a second mini survey just right at the very end, but this is just to give you an opportunity to give your impressions of the presentation. This is a fantastic presentation. And feedback's really important. I know people always say this, it's a cliche, but we do use the feedback that you give us to inform and shape the programme that we present. I can see that the chat, that it's just gone into the chat now, the survey. So if you just click on the link and you can complete that. And although this is the last in the current series, we will be meeting as a team later in the year, in the summer, in order to decide how we want to move forward. And so your feedback is particularly important in relation to this session. So if you could just take a moment, just give you a little bit of time to actually complete the survey. And then also when you have done that, if you would like to put your questions to Lizzie, whilst we're fortunate to have her here with us in the virtual room, if you could put those into the Q&A. If you're having problems putting them into the Q&A, then you can use the chat. The Q&A is just more, it's easier for us to monitor. Things don't get lost in it, and it's also anonymous. So if you prefer to do it that way. Whilst we're waiting also for people to complete the survey, just a reminder that this session is being recorded, and a recording will be available on the ACAM website within the week. And the slides and the presentation will be a part of that, so you'll all be able to access that or pass it to colleagues as well. So I'm sure many of you will be wanting to share some of the information with your wider teams. Okay, so let's just have a quick look. We've got one or two questions coming in, and we had one or two earlier. So I'm just going to kick off, Lizzie, with the first question, which was not so much a question, but a statement, but I think it'd be worth us thinking about, which is that somebody posted that they were surprised not to see something on the list. I think this means the list of different areas that we were looking at with the UK Council's document about the risk of sexual abuse and assault. And this person works with survivors and perpetrators of such events, including writing reports as court cases as part of her work or his work. And so if you just had any comments on that in particular, it is obviously something that's it's high profile within the media. It's something that we have concerns about. It's very much part of the RSE statutory requirements, and Ofsted's more recent rapid review about the Everyone's Invited survey, where we heard a great deal of sexual abuse was happening in schools. And some of that would be through social media, of course. So any thoughts that you could give us on that would be welcome.
Well, I think just in terms of my own research, part of my PhD research involved interviewing 13-year-olds, and I was quite taken aback by the kind of levels of sexual harassment that they reported receiving through social media. And what was quite stark in my analysis was looking at those young people who reported kind of very open relationships with their parents, who had a kind of an authoritative parenting style, and those young people felt able to talk to their parents about their online experiences, and could approach them for advice about how to kind of amend their settings and so on, if they were contacted by strangers. And then there were also young people who, you know, their parents had banned particular apps, and they'd sort of gone behind their backs to download Snapchat, for example, or Instagram, and because they'd done that kind of illicitly when they received this kind of disturbing contact from strangers, they, you know, they didn't feel able to talk to anybody about it, because they knew if they mentioned it to their parents, then their phone would be confiscated, or, you know, they'd have to delete Instagram or whatever. So again, it's just my only experience of that as a theme is really just emphasizing again this kind of importance of, rather than kind of suggesting bans or these kind of arbitrary cutoff points for screen time and things like that, it's about kind of really having those open conversations about social media and what young people are seeing online, and how they can respond to that as well.
Thank you. And I mean, obviously the huge implication there, and this is advice that I'm hearing in many quarters at the moment, but there's an implication for educating parents hugely, isn't there? It's and it's such an area of tremendous growth and change, so it's really hard for parents to keep up. Do you have any recommendations of particular places that you would signpost parents to in their role of educating, rather than trying to kind of put the genie back in the bottle, which we'll never be able to do, will we?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really key thing, is to educate ourselves as adults as well. And as a researcher in the area, and also as a parent myself, I find it completely impossible to keep up. You know, when I started my PhD, TikTok it wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
So none of the conversations I had with young people, you know, it wasn't very long ago, nobody even mentioned TikTok at that point. But so there are lots and lots of great resources online for parents, for teachers, and for young people themselves. Again, I think there are almost so many that it can feel quite overwhelming at times, but there is, so the blog that I quoted from earlier, this psychologist in the States called Jacqueline Nessie, she blogs about kind of research relating mainly to social media use, things like access to pornography in teenagers and gaming, and she kind of takes the research evidence and translates it into a really kind of user-friendly format. So I'd really recommend her blog, and I'm sorry I didn't send a link to that beforehand.
I think we can probably get that. Was it Jacqueline Nessie?
Nessie, yeah. So her blog is called Techno Sapiens. I'll just write it in the chat now.
That's great.
Yeah, I would very much recommend that. But also, you know, there are links to the NSPCC website's great, and Internet Matters.
Yes. Yeah.
I think what you really need is a kind of step-by-step instructions on how to manage kind of privacy settings and parental controls and those kind of things.
And I guess it's for parents, it's about starting early on, isn't it? And starting and then growing their learning as their children are developing and wanting to have more access to different kind of apps and so on. Yeah. Thank you. We'll move on to another question now, because the questions are coming in. One person who was obviously paying particular attention to the statistics that you were giving has actually asked, what happens with girls 13 plus and boys 15 plus that diminishes the impact of social media on identity? Or is it that there is simply more of something else? That's a good question. And I remember you said that at 19 there was an increase again, which you mentioned you thought could potentially be linked to that, the areas of growing independence, you know, maybe moving away.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm not sure if I've misunderstood the point, but so at age 12 and 13 in girls and 14 and 15 in boys, that's where the risk is heightened.
Yes, and then it dropped.
And then it drops again and then rises at age 19. Yeah, I mean, I don't know, that the authors of that study suggest that it might be something to do with, you know, at what point during puberty your kind of sense of self-worth is particularly fragile, or it might be about that independence. I think one area there are lots, as you say, you know, social media develops so quickly that it's very, very difficult as a research community to kind of keep up with the developments. But one area that is really lacking is that following that kind of developmental trajectory. So a large portion of the research to date has been with the same kind of age group, so around kind of age 14, and there's very little known about younger children in particular. And so I think that's an area that we need to focus on more, is looking at how the risks might change over time, and looking at how, you know, the ways in which young people actually use social media, the different kind of activities and patterns of activities that they're engaging in might change as they go through different stages as well. Yeah, so I think that particular study that highlighted age 12, 13, 14, 15, one thing they highlighted is that they didn't have the kind of data that they needed at below age 12. The numbers were kind of too small to really say much about any effect at that age. So I think we really need to kind of prioritise research in those younger age groups, definitely.
I'm sure you're right, and I'm sure that there are teachers from primary schools joining us this evening that will have a lot of experience of very quickly and rapidly growing issues around social media. For example, things like class WhatsApp groups that I know teachers are reporting to us are causing huge problems, often things that are happening outside school hours, but that children are bringing back into the classroom and taking a huge amount of time and causing lots of problems for children, mental health related problems. So yeah, one question that's kind of slightly related to that is, somebody has asked if you can suggest any resources or strategies specifically that you can signpost to for effectively helping adults, I think, to have conversations about promoting resilience. So, you know, aside from all the, you know, the specific things relating to social media platforms, what can we do to promote resilience and well-being in those conversations? And are there resources that would support parents and teachers in that too?
I have to admit, it's not my
You've just got a magic wand,
specific area of expertise. I think off the top of my head, I think again, you can tell I'm a big fan of Jacqueline Nesi, but I think on the Technosapiens website, I've definitely seen an article there before about parenting approaches specifically.
Yeah.
I think in terms of promoting resilience more broadly, all the big kind of third sector organisational websites have some good stuff. You know, there's Young Minds and
yes, yeah,
PCC and so on.
Yeah, that's right. I was at an event last week where actually Samaritans were presenting about the research that they'd done recently with young people. And what was interesting about that research was that the young people wanted to know more about sort of algorithms and how they were being tracked, that they were aware of how to keep safe personally and about not sharing passwords. They know that, but, you know, I just thought that was quite interesting. We need to find out from young people as well, don't we, where they really need the help, and then we can sort of gear our resilience training towards that. But it is an area definitely that again is supported by the DFE statutory guidance. It is in there, but then teachers have limited time, and certainly in secondary schools the priority and teaching staff for PSHE is not always very high within a school.
Sure. I think that the reason I kept kind of going back to the algorithms, that's an area that I am personally very interested in, because young people themselves said that they didn't really understand how social media algorithms worked, or either they didn't understand or they were hyper aware of the role that they had in kind of pushing disturbing or depressing content onto their feeds. And I think algorithmic literacy in particular is currently lacking from kind of media literacy. Yes, indeed. Development. I think that's something that we could definitely improve.
Yes, that very much came out at the Children, Young and People's Mental Health Coalition meeting that I attended last week, and how that needs to be very much strengthened. So yeah.
I would say, just going back, sorry, to your point about you know, teachers not having a lot of time to do e-safety lessons and things. One of the kind of points that I was trying to make through my slides is that so many of the issues that are relevant to using social media safely, apart from the obvious, you know, very specific privacy settings and browser settings and all that kind of stuff, but thinking more about those kind of cross-cutting issues around trust and around
Yes.
I can't think off the top of my head now, discrimination, you know, all those kind of things.
Yes. Yeah.
That they're things that are relevant within existing PSHE lessons.
Offline or online, yeah.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So core skills. Yeah.
Absolutely. And social media use, we sometimes think of it as this completely kind of separate thing that we need to learn about, but it's not really like that anymore. You know, it really is ingrained within everyday life, and those boundaries aren't so clear cut anymore.
Very, very much so, and especially for young people where they live offline and online very, very seamlessly. Yeah. One of the questions actually that's come through about how things impact on schools is, do you have any, and this is a tricky one actually, and the answer may be, I'm not sure. Do you have any advice or evidence as to how to deal with the conflicts that arise from social media in school within the school environment? You know, bearing in mind that disagreements, often parents get involved as well. This can be, it can spread hugely because we know the viral nature of social media. That is, you know, of itself one of its features. How do schools deal with these conflicts? Do you have any thoughts, or is there any emerging research that shows what schools are doing about this?
There's no research that I know of. I'm not quite sure how to answer that.
It's a tricky question, it is.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's all kind of very specific around, you know, you mentioned the thing about WhatsApp group chats and things like that, and
whole class ones sometimes.
Yeah, and maybe it's about kind of addressing or maybe about kind of those discussions around how some things that might not seem to be a form of bullying are, you know, excluding people from a group chat when the rest of the class is involved, you know, that can have
absolutely, yeah,
for that
exclusion, which we know happens a lot, even not with social media too. Yeah.
But no, sorry, I can't think of any.
Well, I think that's one for us to be aware of, and when we're in various lobbying groups to try and see how we can advance that. There've been a few questions coming in, TikTok related questions, and this relates to what we were talking about, that your particular interest, Lizzie, which was about algorithms. So I'll just read this one out. TikTok trend is having negative impact in our school, with young people almost believing that they can't be tracked or traced. Impact of messages not understood by teenagers at our school. Is this also related to their brain, the development in their brain too? And are you aware of any research relating to the impact of a digital manipulation, which is related to the algorithms, such as Snapchat and TikTok filters, and their effects on children's mental health and their self-image? So a couple of sort of different aspects there. Tell me if you want to read either again.
In terms of research, I think there's quite a large body of research looking specifically at body image and self-esteem and digital filters, and again, I keep going back to it, but that kind of digital literacy skills and media literacy, you know, I think that's where the importance of that comes in. I saw a really good newspaper article a few years ago of showing kind of, I think it was Rankin, the photographer, had a group of young people where he took their photos and asked them to manipulate them digitally until they were happy with their appearance, or they were happy for the image to be posted online. And, you know, the difference between the two was really quite shocking. And I think there's a new filter I've seen on TikTok where you can produce a kind of filter that, you know, follows you as you move. And it's very difficult because, you know, I think, as I already said, the technology moves at such a pace that it's very difficult for research to kind of keep up with it and to produce much kind of evidence around things before they're already, you know, ingrained into everyday usage. So with things like TikTok, I think, yeah, the research community is still struggling to to catch up. It's only really been in very recent years that TikTok's become popular, so it's often not included in research studies so far.
And do you think that will change now?
I'm sure, yeah. It's
must.
One issue that we face as researchers in this field is trying to get that balance right between being general enough to be kind of applicable to most of the population, but without having it so general that it's not relevant. You know, I think that's why so much is focused on social media screen time, without asking those more nuanced questions, is because, you know, as soon as you go down looking at specific platforms, you know, they're already out of date 2 years later. So
yeah, absolutely. It's what you said about this cross-cutting sort of research. One which is sort of related to TikTok, and this doesn't surprise me that this has come up, it's useful. In relation to risks, is anyone researching the possible effects of influencers, specifically influencers such as Andrew Tate, on discrimination, prejudice, hate and bullying? Interesting question. Is that something that's being particularly looking at, the role of the influencer, which is something that, you know, a few years ago didn't exist and now is huge?
Yeah, no, I'm sure they are. Sorry, I don't know off the top of my head any names, but I'm absolutely positive they are influencers, and that kind of the role of misinformation. And also, again, going back to algorithms, you know, the kind of inherent bias that can be present in algorithms in terms of, you know, perpetuating racial stereotypes and things like that. So, yeah, I think that is a big focus, or an emerging focus of research. But I'm sorry, I don't have any specific.
So we just need to bring it back in 6 months or a year to find out what the progress.
Exactly. Quite, yeah.
You may be actually doing that yourself. This question chimes with my own experience here. So somebody said that their child had a tech-free day a week that was put in place from day one of them having tech. And she now, I presume she's sort of grown up now, this person, so the child grown up now says that she actually appreciated that time off each week. I bet she didn't say so at the time, but that's very interesting, isn't it? And the question is, would this be harder to put into place now with so much social media available and this sort of seamless, you know, life on and offline?
Yeah, it does. It reminds me of something that one of my research participants said, again, a 13-year-old who talked about going away to camp, you know, once a year or something in school holidays where they weren't allowed their phones, and how once the initial kind of fear of missing out and panicking about things had gone away, she really enjoyed not having her phone with her, and that she would actually quite like to not use social media anymore, but that it would have to be done in this kind of group context where everybody in school got rid of
everybody else's. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
That, I was going to ask, actually, is there any evidence of social norms? We in our organisation do a lot of work around social norms relating to children's use or non-use of legal and illegal substances, and the social norms shows very consistently that most children and adults overestimate the amount of risk that people are taking. They overestimate how much people are drinking, or whether they're drinking, smoking, whatever, vaping now. They massively overestimate it. When we talk to young people and ask them how many they think smoke, you know, in 100, they think it's about 50%, 20% even, and it's something like 1 or 2% now for cigarettes. Do children overestimate how much other children use social media, or do we know anything about the actual norms? I'm sure we do. And how do they compare with children's perceptions or young people's perceptions of the norms?
That's a really good question. I don't think there's much about overestimating or underestimating other people's use, but there's a lot of research on how poor we are at estimating our own social media use. So, you know, comparing. And
is that because we use it a lot more than we think we do? So
no, it's usually that we. So I think it's women are particularly likely to overestimate their own social media use, and I think there's I think that in itself can be a form of kind of this sort of digital stress where, you know, there's those feelings of guilt attached to what you're doing with your time and whether it's productive or not. And that's something that really came out with interviews with young people as well, is that, you know, almost across the board, they wanted to reduce their screen time, but it wasn't for themselves, if you see what I mean. It was because they knew that their parents or their teachers felt that they should be reducing their screen time. So there was this kind of expectation that what they were doing was inherently wrong, even though they might have been using their social media accounts to you know, talk with a close friend, you know,
or a study aid or something.
So I think there's this kind of inherent belief that social media use is somehow bad in and of itself. You know, and that in itself I don't think is very helpful in terms of how young people feel about themselves. But
it's about how we use it. It comes back to that. And what's interesting with the social norms, it shows that if people overestimate, they're more likely to do more of the risk-taking behaviour. So if we can get the correct norms out, then they're more likely to do the risky behaviour less. So it's just something I think that, you know, social norms would be good to have more research on that in the future.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think sorry, I've completely lost my train.
That's okay. It's okay. We got one more question there which is different and I think really valuable actually. And again, this may be still emerging, but do you know of any good research related to language development in children and use of the internet? So this is when children are watching videos and, you know, put into the screen, what is it, the screen nanny? Does it help or hinder language development? That's a great question.
That's an excellent question. And
children are given tablets or something to keep them busy, or even just, you know, watch them a lot for other reasons.
Yeah, I think I'm vaguely aware of some colleagues at Bristol University who do work around that in that area. I can't think of their name at the moment, but I'm not sure specifically in terms of language development, but I know, you know, the general guidance is that in terms of using screens, that the best thing to do is to use them together. You know, it's about those kind of shared experiences. So if your child or teenager is watching something, you know, the best thing you can do is sit and watch it with them, and then you can talk about it with them.
But like Love Island, we're all condemned to watching it with our teenagers. It's a very good point though. Yeah, thank you. Very last question, very last one, because we're running out of time. Do cultural differences play a role in self-image and identity? Any evidence for that?
I don't think there's much evidence around it. I'm sure they do. Again, another criticism of the field is that very little research is carried out in, I know this isn't really exactly what the question's asking, but in kind of non-Western countries. So the vast majority of studies on social media use and young people's mental health take place in the US, in the UK, or in Australia. And then what we tend to do is then generalize those to adolescents globally when that's really not the case. So I think, again, that's a new focus.
Sort of emerging area. Thank you. Well, we'll bring our Q&A to a close, and thank you, Lizzie, because there were some very searching questions there. And obviously this is a massively emerging area, and there will be more and more research coming out, you know, all the time. So it's just something that we have to keep watching closely and responding to.
Find out more about becoming an ACAM member and to be part of the advancement of child and adolescent mental health. Visit www.acamh.org.